It's April the 2nd. Let's read the Bible. Welcome back, friends, to this year-long journey from Genesis to Revelation in just 1 year. Here we are, early in April. We've come to Judges chapters 6, 7, and 8. Are you enjoying this journey? I got to tell you, I was just sitting here thinking about it before we started this Bible reading, that I have read the Bible many times. But there's something about reading it out loud and knowing that it's going to be up on the internet. You pay different attention to it. I have learned so much. In some ways, what I feel like is, after all these years, I've learned again how much I still need to know, how much more there is in God's Word. So this is, as everybody says, the Bible's not just a book. The Bible is the Word of God. When we read Judges 6, 7, and 8, this is God's message to us today. So what an amazing blessing. Now, I've been talking to you about the book of Judges. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. It's that book that takes us from the death of Joshua to the story of Samuel and Saul, the first king of Israel. Covers about 300 years. It's a story of two things. Number one, the faithfulness of God, and number two, the repeated, continual failure of God's people. Here's the outline of the book. The reasons for the judges, chapters 1 and 2. The rule of the judges, chapters 3 through 16. And the results of the judges, chapters 17 through 21. And I keep going back to this cycle of judgment. Disobedience leads to decline, leads to defeat, leads to desperation, leads to deliverance. Then the people forget and they disobey again, decline, defeat, desperation, deliverance. And it's repeated over and over again. So long as they have a good leader, a good judge who delivers them, God's people remember. But as soon as the judge dies, the people begin to wander away again. So today, Judges 6, 7, and 8. This is a story of Gideon, and I just pause here to remark, I still remember when I was a student at Dallas Theological Seminary, then this would be almost 50 years ago, a man was preaching in chapel on that verse in Hebrews 11 about that mentions Gideon and Barak and Jephthah and Samson. And when he talked about Gideon, he called him the Barney Fife of the Old Testament. I still remember that. That dates me. If you're under 50, you probably have no idea who Barney Fife was, but it is true. Gideon was a man who certainly felt unequal to the task. Let's see the story. Judges 6. The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord handed them over to Midian 7 years, and they oppressed Israel. Because of Midian, the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and the people of the east came and attacked them. They encamped around them and destroyed the produce of the land, even as far as Gaza. They left nothing for Israel to eat, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. For the Midianites came with their cattle and their tents like a great swarm of locusts. They and their camels were without number, and they entered the land to lay waste to it. So Israel became poverty-stricken because of Midian, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord. When the Israelites cried out to him because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to them. He said to them, "This is what the Lord God of Israel said. I brought you out of Egypt and out of the place of slavery. I rescued you from the power of Egypt and the power of all who oppressed you. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites whose land you live in, but you did not obey me." The angel of the Lord came, and he sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite. His son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, valiant warrior." Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened? And where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about?" They said, "Hasn't the Lord brought us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and deliver Israel from the grasp of Midian. I am sending you." He said to him, "Please, Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Look, My family is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's family. But I will be with you. The Lord said to him, you will strike Midian down as if it were one man. Then he said to him, if I have found favor with you, give me a sign that you are speaking with me. Please do not leave this place until I return to you. Let me bring my gift and set it before you. And he said, I will stay until you return. So Gideon went and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from a half bushel of flour. He placed the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot. He brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. The angel of God said to him, take the meat with the unleavened bread, put it on this stone and pour the broth on it. So he did that. The angel of the Lord extended the tip of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. Fire came up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. Then the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. When Gideon realized he was the angel of the Lord, he said, oh no, Lord God, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, peace to you, do not be afraid, for you will not die. So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, the Lord is peace. It is still an Ophrah of the Abiezrites today. On that very night, the Lord said to him, take your father's young bull and a second bull, 7 years old, then tear down the altar of Baal that belongs to your father and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Build a well-constructed altar to the Lord your God on the top of this mound. Take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah pole you cut down. So Gideon took 10 of his male servants and did as the Lord had commanded him. But because he was too afraid of his father's family and the men of the city to do it in the daytime, he did it at night. When the men of the city got up in the morning, they found Baal's altar torn down, the Asherah pole beside it cut down, and the second bull offered up on the altar that had been built. They said to each other, who did this? After they made a thorough investigation, they said, Gideon, son of Joash, did this. Then the men of the city said to Joash, bring out your son. He must die, because he tore down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. But Joash said to all who stood against him, would you plead Baal's case for him? Would you save him? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead his own case, because someone tore down his altar. That day, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, since Joash said, let Baal contend with him, because he tore down his altar. All the Midianites, Amalekites, and people of the east gathered together, crossed over the Jordan, and camped in the Jezreel valley. The Spirit of the Lord enveloped Gideon. He blew the ram's horn, and the Abiezrites rallied behind him. He sent messengers throughout all of Manasseh who rallied behind him. He sent messengers also throughout Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, who also came to meet him. Then Gideon said to God, and by the way, this is the part of the story we know him best for, Gideon's fleece. Verse 36. Then Gideon said to God, if you will deliver Israel by me, as you said, I will put a wool fleece here on the threshing floor. If dew is only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, I will know that you will deliver Israel by me as you said. And that is what happened. When he got up early in the morning, he squeezed the fleece and wrung dew out of it, filling a bowl with water. Wasn't enough. Gideon then said to God, don't be angry with me. Let me speak one more time. Please allow me to make one more test with the fleece. Let it remain dry and the dew be all over the ground. That night, God did as Gideon requested. Only the fleece was dry and dew was all over the ground. Just this comment about the putting out of the fleece. Gideon did not put out a fleece to determine God's will. That's the way we use it today. We're not sure what to do, and so we make up some sign to determine God's will. God had already told Gideon what he was to do. It was a sign of his weak faith that he asked for the fleece situation, the sign of the fleece. But understand, there is quite a difference between knowing God's will, trying to determine God's will, and confirming God's will. And the sign here was, Lord, you've told me, but just would you make clear to me that what I have heard is exactly what you said? And God in his kindness condescended to Gideon, and Gideon put out the fleece twice. And God confirmed what his will was. I really don't recommend that. You can be, today it's too easy to be misled, but we understand it was a sign of not a strong faith, but of Gideon's weak faith. He already knew what God had told him to do, be that as it may. Now he knows. Now he's got to go into battle against the Midianites. I don't blame him for being hesitant. Judges 7. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the troops who were with him got up early and camped beside the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them, below the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many troops for me to hand the Midianites over to them, or else Israel might elevate themselves over me and say, I saved myself. Now announce to the troops, whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 of the troops turned back, but 10,000 remained. So he started with 32,000, now he's got 10,000. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "There's still too many troops. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. If I say to you, this one can go with you, he can go. But if I say about anyone, this one cannot go, he cannot go." So he brought the troops down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, "Separate everyone who laps water with his tongue like a dog. Do the same with everyone who kneels to drink." The number of those who lapped with their hands to their mouths was 300 men. All the rest, 9,700, knelt to drink water. The Lord said to Gideon, "I will deliver you with the 300 men who lapped and hand the Midianites over to you, but everyone else is to go home." So Gideon sent all the Israelites to their tents, but he kept the 300 troops who took the provisions and the ram's horn. The camp of Midian was below him in the valley. That night the Lord said to him, "Get up and attack the camp, for I have handed it over to you. But if you're afraid to attack the camp, go down with Purah, your servant. Listen to what they say, and then you'll be encouraged to attack the camp." So he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outpost of the troops who were in the camp. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of Eth had settled down in the valley like a swarm of locusts, and their camels were as innumerable as the sand on the seashore. When Gideon arrived, there was a man telling his friend about a dream. He said, "Listen, I had a dream. A loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp, struck a tent, and it fell. The loaf turned the tent upside down so it collapsed." His friend answered, "This is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash the Israelite. God has handed the entire Midianite camp over to him." When Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. He returned to Israel's camp and said, "Get up, for the Lord has handed the Midianite camp over to you." Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies and gave each of the men a ram's horn in one hand and an empty pitcher with a torch inside it in the other hand. "Watch me," he said, "and do what I do. When I come to the outpost of the camp, do as I do. When I and everyone with me blow our ram's horns, you're to blow your ram's horns all around the camp. Then you will say, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" Gideon and the 100 men who were with him went to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch after the sentries had been stationed. They blew their ram's horns and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew their ram's horns and shattered their pitchers. They held their torches in their left hands and their ram's horn to blow in their right hand, and they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Each Israelite took his position around the camp, and the entire Midianite camp began to run, and they cried out as they fled. When Gideon's men blew their 300 ram's horns, the Lord caused the men in the whole army to turn on each other with their swords. They fled to Acacia House in the direction of Zazerah, as far as the border of Abel Meholah near Tabbath. Then the men of Israel were called from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh, and they pursued the Midianites. Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim with this message: "Come down to intercept the Midianites and take control of the water courses ahead of them as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan." So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they took control of the water courses as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. They captured Oreb and Zeb, the 2 princes of Midian. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb while they were pursuing the Midianites. They brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. One of the great battle plans of the Old Testament. Divide his 300 men, blow the horns, break those lanterns, strike fear. But remember, the text says, Gideon and his men did their part, but it was the Lord who sent confusion. The Lord who sent confusion caused the Midianites, the bad guys, started killing each other off. There was a rout. The other men of Israel came and joined them. It was a total victory for the people of God. Now, chapter 8. Always some trouble. The men of Ephraim said to him, "Why have you done this to us, not calling us when you went to fight against the Midianites?" And they argued with him violently. So he said to them, "What have I done now compared to you? Is not the gleaning of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? God handed over to you Oreb and Zeb, the two princes of Midian. What was I able to do compared to you?" When he said this, their anger against him subsided. Now, verse 4. Gideon and the 300 men came to the Jordan and crossed it. They were exhausted, but still in pursuit. He said to the men of Succoth, "Please give some loaves of bread to the troops under my command, because they are exhausted, for I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the princes of Succoth said, "Are Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hands, that we should give bread to your army?" Gideon replied, "Very well. When the Lord has handed Zebah and Zalmunna over to me, I will tear your flesh with thorns and briars from the wilderness." He went from there to Penuel and asked the same thing from them. The men of Penuel answered just as the men of Succoth had answered. He also told the men of Penuel, "When I return safely, I will tear down this tower." Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and with them was their army of about 15,000 men, who were all those left of the entire army of the people of the east. Those who had been killed were 120,000 armed men. Gideon traveled on the caravan route east of Nobah and Jogbehah and attacked their army while the army felt secure. Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them. He captured these two kings of Midian and routed the entire army. Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heraz. He captured a youth from the men of Succoth and interrogated him. The youth wrote down for him the names of the 77 leaders and elders of Succoth. Then he went to the men of Succoth and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna. You taunted me about them, saying, 'Are Zebah and Zalmunna now in your power, that we should give bread to your exhausted men?'" So he took the elders of the city, and he took some thorns and briars from the wilderness, and he disciplined the men of Succoth with them. He gave them a good thrashing. He also tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. He asked Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men did you kill at Tabor?" "They were like you," they said. "Each resembled the son of a king." So he said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not have killed you." Then he said to Jether, his firstborn, "Get up and kill them." The youth did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. Zebah and Zalmunna, leaders of the bad guys, said, "Get up and strike us down yourself, for a man is judged by his strength." So Gideon got up, killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. Then the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you as well as your sons and your grandsons, for you delivered us from the power of Midian." But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Then he said to them, "Let me make a request of you. Everyone give me an earring from his plunder." Now the enemy had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. They said, "We agree to give them." So they spread out a cloak, and everyone threw an earring from his plunder on it. The weight of the gold earrings, as he requested, was 43 pounds of gold, in addition to the crescent ornaments and ear pendants, the purple garments on the kings of Midian, and the chains on the necks of their camels. Gideon made an ephod from all this and put it in Ophrah, his hometown. Then all Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his household. It doesn't matter what his motives were. He should have known better. The ephod belongs to the high priest. It's not to be some kind of trinket set off, some kind of thing set off by itself. So Midian, verse 28, was subdued before the Israelites, and they were no longer a threat. The land had peace for 40 years during the days of Gideon. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, son of Joash, went back to live at his house. Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, since he had many wives. His concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. Then Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah, son of the Abiezrites. When Gideon died, the Israelites turned and prostituted themselves by worshiping the Baals and made Baal Bereth their god. The Israelites did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hand of their enemies around them. They did not show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, for all the good he had done for Israel. This is a great story because you sort of have everything. You have all the aspects right here. Gideon was afraid. He was insecure. We would say today he had low self-image. I'm the youngest and I'm the least family, and we're from this tribe. And you have something like he says, the angel, Lord, you made a mistake. You got the wrong guy here. It can't be me. It can't be my family. And his father was involved in Baal worship. And so the Lord just brought him along. That's good, isn't it? The Lord just worked with his weaknesses, worked with his doubt, worked with the fact that he didn't come from a perfect background, worked with the fact that God met him at the point of his need. God made the fleece wet and the ground dry, and then he made the ground wet and the fleece dry, which is a much greater miracle. And he didn't get angry with him. God just met him right, condescended to him, and then even said, if you're afraid, just go down and listen. And he takes the Purah with him, and they listen to the Midianites. And the guy has a dream. The other fellow says, well, it's because Gideon's going to wipe out the Midianites. God's in charge of all of this, right? That's one of the things I'm getting as I'm reading this Old Testament. God is in charge of the whole thing. You can't explain it otherwise. And then there's this amazing victory over the Midianites, and then the Ephraimites, they're upset. And then you've got Succoth and that other town, and they don't want to help. And he gives them one a great thrashing and kills the men of the other town. And then he says, give me the ornaments and the earrings. And he makes an ephod, and the people end up worshiping it. And what a mess. And yet, way down there in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, we're going to get to it before the end of the year. When we get to Hebrews, just remember I told you Gideon was a man of God. For all of his weaknesses and all of his doubts and all of his mistakes and all of it, he was a man of God, and God used him to deliver his people. And once he was dead and gone, Israel drifted away. It's that cycle of disobedience and all the way around. Let's just hold on to one thought today. Aren't you glad God meets us where we are? Aren't you glad he doesn't demand perfection before he uses us? If God demanded perfection, he wouldn't use any of us. Let's just say, Lord, use me. Here I am. Use me, send me. Make me effective for you today. What is the greatest ability? It's availability. Make yourself available to God today, and God will do great things in you, with you, and through you. That's a promise. Just say, Lord, here am I, use me, and stand back and see what the Lord does. Go out, have a great day today. Come back tomorrow. The story is going to take another twist and turn. See you then.